Welcome everybody to the American Space Museum. I'm Marquette. We're so glad you're with us to stay curious. Today we got astronaut wrangler Nick Thomas with us today. Nick, great to see you, buddy.
Be here. Thank you, Mark.
Boy, he has got some stories today. As Nick, you're going to go through the shuttles of the month of August. You know we love promoting our shuttle era on Stay Curious. You're going to learn a lot about some astronauts, a lot of stuff I'm sure I won't know about. We got our beautiful ISS behind us here that's got four new people living on there. Yeah. We've gone up to 604 humans, Nick, have orbited the Earth, and 74th woman has gone up there with Jasmine Magoli, the commander, Marine commander. Mm-hmm. That allows me to say oorah to Marty over there, Marine. Marty, how you doing? Hope you had a good day off Friday. People missed you and wanted to make sure you weren't ill. And I said, no, you were just taking a good day off. So say hi to Dave Stange out there.
I was a little bit ill because the Yankees lost. Went to the Yankee Tampa Bay game.
Oh.
They lost 3-0 on a two-hitter.
Oh.
Bad day.
Yeah, well, you got to see him play anyway. Your pinstripes there. Well, we've got a great show here. Just want to tell you a little bit about Nick. Nick is the chief communicator for Delaware North at Kennedy Space Center Visitors Complex, and Nick Thomas for more than 35 years. He has brought education, enlightenment, and his love for space to millions of daily visitors out there. You're a Harry Holcomb News and Communication Award winner in 2017. That's a big deal to the journalists around here at the National Space Club of Florida does that. But you also got that coveted Snoopy Award, where you were recommended by an astronaut, and they flew that little Snoopy pin up there. That's a NASA management thing. So, Nick, we do call you the astronaut wrangler out there. Every day he supervises the public talks, the autograph sessions, and is behind the scenes on many public events. And we couldn't be happier that Nick Thomas supports the American Space Museum. Tell everybody what you think of our humble little museum here, Nick.
Well, it is really incredible to see how this museum has become the repository for so much history here in Brevard County. I'd like to think of Brevard County as being the birthplace of American manned spaceflight, and the things that you have on display here are just priceless. The control room there in the back for the from Cape Canaveral, and of course the suits, the incredible amount of documentation you have here, particularly on the shuttle program. It really is a treasure here in Brevard County, and I think y'all are to be congratulated and commended for pulling all this all together and to keep it for keeping it going.
Well, thank you. U.S. Space Walk of Fame Foundation is our nonprofit. You can click the little tab there beneath our screen here on YouTube, and they have a little scale there. Send us $5 up to $500, and Nick is has brought astronauts to us that are interested in doing things at our auctions, and we are a struggling nonprofit here in today's world, and but we are so proud of, like you said, Nick, we are the delivery room of America's space age, if Brevard County is the birthplace. So it means a lot that you and everybody out there at Kennedy Visitors Complex really supports us, and we enjoy a great relationship out there with them. Folks, they have a fantastic program. You come here on vacation, you got to spend the money to go out there and see the astronaut talking. You will learn so much. It's just a great program. And then you can get a free autograph from them either at noon at the gift shop or 4 o'clock under Atlantis. And you really put them through the paces out there.
Well, we have a very tight schedule. We have what I call an eventful schedule. We essentially have 15 minutes between each event, which if we keep the rhythm going, it's enough time to kind of relax, recoup, and get ready for the next event. And then, of course, about an hour for lunch, and then back to the schedule. So it makes the day go by real fast.
It sure does. I saw that you got Woody Spring out there.
Right. We just
right
finished
now,
with Guy
Woody.
Gardner.
If you're coming to the Space Coast here, Woody Spring, Steve Smith, a spacewalker,
Steve's
two
a lot of
spacewalkers
fun,
there. Ken Cameron, a Buckeye, will be there.
And Marty, a fellow Marine, Ken Cameron.
There you go. And then John Fabian, one of the pioneers of the early Space Shuttle era. So Now I see Norm Thagard's coming. We met Norm a couple times. I missed Bob Thirsk. I may want to make sure to see him, Canadian astronaut.
Bob is especially great to see because Bob is a medical doctor, and he can speak to so much of the medical research that's been done up there. And he can also shed some light on the interocular pressure that we've been seeing affecting some astronauts staying up on the station for 6 months or longer, because he was one of the first victims of that.
Wow.
So he can speak to that, and as I say, across the board at any of the medical experiments, issues, or investigations they've done on board ISS.
Well, we're excited also about the last 2 weeks of October. Mike Baker's going to be here, who did an interview with us on Stay Curious, but you're going to have Too Short, Wendy Lawrence, and boy, was she a hit when she was here, Julie Payette, the Canadian astronaut.
People still talk
so
about
you're not
Julie.
taking a vacation there, right?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, we enjoyed her a lot. In fact, I found a couple of things for her to autograph. But then I'm going to turn it over to Nick Thomas here. The month of August, we love celebrating the crewed space missions. Notice I'm saying crude now. I've got that manned out of my mouth.
I haven't. I still say manned, and anyone who has an issue can
feel
free to contact me.
And Nick's going to start off with a truly crewed mission, one of the most important of the Gemini missions. They're all important. But Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's start off there with Gemini 5.
Gemini 5, which a lot of people will or will not know, was the first mission to have an official crew patch. This was kind of a hard sell for Gordon Cooper when they bucked it up to Washington, because originally the patch on the Conestoga wagon had the inscription 8 days or bust. Well, NASA management was concerned that people say, well, if it doesn't go for 8 days, it was a bust. So what they ended up doing in a compromise was they put a cloth cover over that motto. And when Gordo and Pete Conrad got on the aircraft carrier, they took the cover off, and there it was. But that's
because they did make 8 days.
Yes, they did. And that was the first official crew patch of the manned space program. Now, Gemini 5 was a very important mission in that it was a long-duration mission, 8 days. Unfortunately, Gemini 5 has been kind of overshadowed by Gemini 4 with the spacewalk by Ed White, and then Gemini 6 and 7 making that rendezvous. So Gemini 5 kind of sits in between as somewhat of the, I don't say the lost mission, but kind of outshone by its predecessor and follower. They spent 8 days up there, and most importantly, they tested for the first time, they tested fuel cells on board the spacecraft in place of batteries. And they led to some problems toward the end of the mission because they started to act up. And in fact, it got to the point where in order to conserve electrical power and so forth, they shut down a lot of non-essential subsystems and spent a lot of time drifting around the Earth. And Pete Conrad talked about this, and he said Gemini 5 was one of the longest things he ever had to get through, just in terms of wanting to get out of something. He said they've been up there for 8 days. They trained together for a year, so he and Gordon Cooper didn't have a whole lot of new sea stories to swap.
Right.
And when it came time to go to bed, the ground said good night, and then you just kind of sat up there. You didn't go to sleep. You just weren't sleepy. So it was kind of a long duration and somewhat of an ordeal, as Pete Conrad called it. But again, a very important step in our stepping stone process of getting these engineering and development flights from one to the next. Of course, after the 8 days in space, we did 14 days on Gemini 7. Pretty much figured we had the long duration licked by that time and pressed on with rendezvous docking missions. And of course, 8 days is very quaint now, considering we're doing over 6 months on board the International Space Station.
Nick, is it true that Conrad recommended to Lovell and Borman on 6 that they take a book with them?
I think so, although Jim Lovell took roughing it and he didn't read a page. So it's just the idea of trying to pass the time in that kind of a situation could be a little burdensome. But Gordon Cooper, who was actually the first astronaut I ever met. We met back in 1972 over at the Plaza Hotel, Daytona Beach. He was in town for the races. And my brother-in-law got us together, so we spent some time talking about MA9 and Gemini 5. And we talked about, in particular, the food on MA9 because they were still using the pureed foods instead of the freeze-dried foods that came along in Gemini. And Cooper said that one of the items they had on there in the toothpaste tube was pureed beef.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, how was it? And he said, well, you remember kettle ration? I said, yeah, I remember kettle ration, the dog food. He says, well, that's what it smelled like and that's what it tasted like.
And he probably came back a few pounds lighter on there. But, you know, this is pioneering these things.
Yeah.
We're so unknown. That was May of 1963, I believe. And in February 62, we didn't know John Glenn could swallow a tube of applesauce,
We
right?
didn't know what was going to happen with the absence of gravity.
Yeah.
Of course, the muscular process of peristalsis took over and everything was just fine.
Love seeing that Titan missile.
Yeah, it's a beautiful rocket. And when I was a kid from Daytona Beach, it was almost impossible to spot because you can see how cleanly those hypergalls burn. We didn't really see it in Daytona Beach till it hit the condensation layer, and then you got that long trail behind it. But
Nick
it was
grew
a
up
beautiful
in
vehicle.
Daytona Beach. Mentioned that where he grew up there. And folks, what you don't know or have forgotten, many of you under 40 don't know, is across our fruited plains, these Titan rockets were in missile silos,
for
ready to
defense.
protect us from
Prepared
Russian
to carry-
attack.
Prepared to carry nuclear warheads
right.
to their targets. And of course, an advancement over the Atlas ICBM in that these were storable propellants, the hypergalls, monomethylhydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide. So they sat in our silos as first line of defense for many years.
They did.
Now this next view from Gemini 5, that's a view of the Straits of Gibraltar. And again, emphasizing the importance of Earth observation photography in the Gemini program. And in these pictures from Gemini, we first began to understand and appreciate the nature of that thin atmosphere that covers our planet. But again, beautiful picture there of the Straits of Gibraltar and cruising over the Earth at 17,500 miles per hour.
The only border that should matter, that thin blue line.
Here we have Pete Conrad in the right seat, looking over toward Gordon Cooper, and you have an idea here as to the closeness of that cockpit. The window is just basically right in your face, and they waited until after they got securely up on orbit to take off the helmets and the gloves. But again, this is a good idea of the close quarters inside that Gemini capsule.
Mm-hmm. And then one of the more famous pictures of the space age.
I think Jane Conrad was the one who christened this picture. She called it Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. And there you see them on the aircraft carrier after recovery with their thick beards. We got used to that during the Gemini program, seeing the astronauts come back with those thick growths of beard. When Gemini 7 came back home, you saw Lovell and Borman, who'd been up there for 14 days. And Lovell had a very thick beard, but Frank Borman's was a little on the stringy side, and that kind of embarrassed him. So on Apollo 8, when he came back home from Apollo 8, he arranged to have an electric razor waiting for him on the recovery helicopter. So he ran the razor over his face before he got off the helicopter to the salute of the Navy captain.
He does look clean on there, yes,
Yep.
right.
Yep.
In there. Well, iconic image there to put the button on the program there. Tell us, these men fly again, of course.
Well,
Pete Conrad
we had
did.
Pete Conrad, who had a brilliant career, and it was funny because after this flight, Pete was in the office talking to his friend Dick Gordon, and he said, because originally Pete said he was only going to fly one mission in space and then go back to the Navy, and he told Dick Gordon, he said, you can't just fly one mission. He said, why not? He said, well, if you fly just one and quit, everybody will think it scared the hell out of you and you left the program. So he ended up, of course, flying on several missions, including Gemini 12 and then Apollo 12, one of the finest careers in the program. Gordon Cooper, this was Gordo's last flight. Gordo's final assignment was as the backup commander for Apollo 10. That backup crew consisted of Don Isley and Ed Mitchell and Gordo. But after that, Gordo turned his attention to other matters, including racing in Daytona.
Mm-hmm.
And he had been very vocal in his criticism of NASA management, who had criticized him for taking time off to go racing. And his famous quote at that time was, well, what do they want us to be, tiddlywinks players?
Yeah.
And that pretty much alienated him from management, unfortunately. And then, of course, by the rotation rate, Gordo would have cycled into the command for Apollo 13, but Al Shepard had just come off of having been grounded with Meniere syndrome, and he put in a push for Apollo 13. And NASA management said, well, we don't mind Shepard flying, but 13's a little too soon. Let's put him on 14. But by that time, he had beaten Gordo out of any competition. Gordo just decided to hang up his helmet and move on.
Well, one of our Mercury astronauts, though, that I remember on my wall as a kid up there, all 7 of them, and we hope to talk more about Gordo with his daughter. He had 2 daughters born during his era as an astronaut, and then later in life 2 other daughters. And we ran into one. You met her the other day, so we hope to talk to her, Colleen Cooper. So hope she's watching today. But now we're going to segue into our shuttle era and Nick, I'm interested in what you have to say about what I think is one of the most hidden and yet important aspects of the shuttle era, and that, of course, is the approach and landing test. Everyone knows as ALT.
ALT, and this was a very exciting time for us who were following the program, because here we had this absolutely brand new concept in space flight, and so much of its success was going to hinge on its ability to fly within the atmosphere and make a safe landing on the runway or the lake bed. So by nature of the design, you had to take it up and you had to test it, make sure the airframe worked properly. We had a couple of captured flights, which just stayed on the back of the 747, and we took aerodynamic data from those missions. Here we see 2 of the astronauts on the flight deck of Enterprise. Yeah, that's Fred Hayes and Gordon Fullerton. And you can see here the sparse nature of that cockpit in the Enterprise. Later on, of course, when we had the flight articles going into space, there were a lot more knobs, switches, dials, and circuit breakers, over 2,100 of them. But here we have a vehicle that's simply designed to interpret aerodynamic data, stability of the vehicle, handling characteristics, and so forth. And in fact, we had the captive flights, then we had a phase of release flights that kept the tail cone on. We'll see that in a little bit. And then a series of flights without the tail cone. So all this was a steady, step-by-step flight test, engineering flight test program to evaluate the vehicle as an earthbound glider.
That is Fred Hayes after Apollo 13.
Yeah.
I've been privileged to meet him. What a tremendous human being he is. He's been a big supporter of the American Space Museum, as friends with our godfather, Charlie Mars. And Gordon Fullerton, never got to meet him. He died about 12 years ago. But we talked to his wife, Marie. Back in July at the Hall of Fame there. What a delightful lady she is, to get to know her. Now we're going to Nick will tell us about those tests.
This is one of our release flights, you can see, with the tail cone on. And as you initiated this test, you had to count down. You blew the bolts, which were the connections, single connection forward and 2 connections aft, same as it would have on the external fuel tank. So you had to count down 3, 2, 1, release. And at that time, the orbiter would head uphill slightly, and the 747 would head downhill and turn to the left to avoid any possible contact between the two. But that was the beginning of the free test flights with the tail cone on.
And which was April 15th, 1977. I mean, August. We're in the month of August here.
And I think in the next picture, you get a nice close-up there of the vehicle with tail cone on. And the idea was that you would separate from the vehicle, and then you would go into the maneuver to head for the runway final approach, and bring the vehicle down at a 20-degree dive angle, which is just as steep as a bombing run in an F-4. And then about 2,000 feet off the ground, you'd pre-flare, bring the nose up to about a 2 to 3 degree nose up angle, and then deploy the gear at 400 feet and then touch down. And here we have one of the free flights without the tail cone coming in on runway 33 over at Edwards Air Force Base. Now, you had a lot of lake bed that you could land out there, but pilots tell me that if you had to land out at Edwards, you'd really like to land on that concrete runway.
You might have noticed the little unicorn spike on the front of the vehicle there.
Yeah, that's used for aerodynamic data, altitude and airspeed, and of course tied into the instruments, the DFI, developmental flight instrumentation recorders inside the vehicle.
This orbiter, I believe it's OV-101, never went to space. It was called Enterprise. The Star Trek people got together.
Well, it was originally named the Constitution, and I was looking forward to having a vehicle that we could call Old Ironsides.
Yeah, really.
But then the Trekkies got in there, and they had their way, and it was renamed as the Enterprise, which is also the name of a Valiant aircraft carrier during World War II.
Okay.
And here we see the crew coming off the vehicle. Of course, not having to worry about their balance because they haven't been up in space for several days. But again, some great engineering data that was gathered during these test flights of the Enterprise. Again, these flights have gone somewhat unnoticed by the younger generations, but those of us that were alive during this time recall it as a very exciting time because it was the validation of this new and totally different concept in human spaceflight and bringing the vehicle back home on wings and wheels.
Yes, and reusable, and this was the important part because it was a glider, like Nick said. No, they just had one chance at landing.
A glider with about a 3-to-1 glide ratio.
Yeah, exactly, in there. So, great program. We hope to have some people on and talk about it on Stay Curious, including the launch director, Bob Seek, that was involved out there. But it was a year-and-a-half period where it was very intense in trying to make sure that this orbiter could land where they wanted it to land. So, well, Nick, we've had 9 beautiful shuttles in the month of August. I believe they involved 53 crew members. 6 of them were women. 3 of them were before the Challenger disaster. 5 deployed satellites. 3 were hard hat missions. Interesting discovery, Orbiter 103 was 5 of these missions, and then all other 4 orbiters flew one time in the month of August.
Well, Discovery is our flight leader. She has the most number of flights under her belt, which is why she was selected to be displayed at the Smithsonian Museum. So, yeah, Discovery, we're very, very proud of her. She led our 2 recovery flights after Challenger and after Columbia. Right. So she's what I call the grand dam of the fleet.
Grand dam of the fleet, for sure. Well, you're going to start off with the last launch of the month of July, launched August 30th. And
SCS-8, commanded by Dan Brandenstein. Dr. Bill Thornton on the crew. Dale Gardner, and also Guy Bluford, who at the time became the first African American to fly in space. STS-8 was first night launch and night landing of the shuttle program, and also it deployed the INSAT-1 Bravo satellite, and he also performed a lot of testing of the remote manipulator arm on that flight. Now, as a result of this being the very first night launch and night landing, there were several critical items that were being looked at, particularly for a night landing. And one of them was, as I mentioned earlier, at about 2,000 feet, you took the vehicle out of that 20-degree dive and brought it up to about 2 to 3 degrees nose up. Now, the cue on the head-up display on that maneuver was simply a flashing word flare, and that was kind of an abrupt signal. So. Dick Truly talked to the team who were working on the head-up display, and they said, I need something that's a little more gradual that can blend me into that maneuver. So that's when they came up with the idea of the 2 triangles coming up toward the pipper, and as soon as they joined with the pipper, that was time to perform the flare. But you could watch those 2 triangles coming up and realize that you're 3, 2, 1 flare. So it was a more gently blended maneuver with that leading indicator coming up on the head-up display. But those are some of the things that you need to look at as a commander when you're landing this vehicle. And if you see a way of making that a little bit easier, as Dick Truly did, then you go ahead and bring that to the attention of the engineers, and they get it done.
Marty's got a question over there, Nick.
Yes, sir.
Move that over here.
Here we have a question from Bill Whiting. Nick, we know you've seen most of the launches. Which one did you miss seeing in person that you wish that you could have seen or would have been able to view, and why?
What one did you miss?
Yeah, it's just really hard to say. I think when you look back at the ones you saw, you think about the ones that you were grateful to be there to see.
Mhm.
And people have asked me quite often, what's the best launch you've ever seen? And obviously that's Apollo 11 back in 1969 from the shores of Titusville here. But then after that, I guess the most important launch I ever saw was the first launch with people on board that I knew. And that's a whole different bag. You know, the anticipation leading up to that, because you know people on board that spacecraft, and there's a little more of an apprehension involved with that.
But what Bill's asking, Nick, is what launch have you missed?
That I missed. I really can't think of them. There have been 135 of them, and I just have to sit down with the manifest to answer that question.
Mine is easy. I've seen them all.
Yeah, okay.
And every one of them's different, Marty says.
Yeah, everyone.
There. So
Absolutely.
there's the STS-8
There's
crew
the
there.
Yeah, up there to the right in the picture, Dr. Bill Thornton. And he was the fellow who came up with the idea of the treadmill.
Mhm.
In the early days of the shuttle, that treadmill consisted of a pad and the handles and the bungee cords, and you basically got on there on your socks and you ran on that static pad. And one of the astronauts talked about how hot your feet got when you were doing that after a few steps.
Oh, really?
And some of the guys referred to that as Thornton's Revenge.
Thornton's Revenge.
Yeah.
I never heard of that. He is an important person of the shuttle era, developing a lot of the cardio exercises and things up there. And
He was also involved in the program called SMEET, which was a long-duration ground test for the Skylab program. And we had a SMEET reunion, including Bill Thornton. He told some good.
did you? We just lost Bob Coe,
Yeah, Bob
who was
Coe.
on that, and Bob Crippen, of course, survives at age 85. Yep, we lost Thornton, I think, 2 years ago, maybe. There's their deployment of a satellite.
That's the InSat 1 Bravo, and again, the idea was you spun that satellite up in its cradle, and you got it going a certain number of RPMs to stabilize it. So when you jettisoned it and it flew out into space, when that engine fired, it would fire through the center of mass of that satellite. So that was the reason you put the spin on these satellites deploying from the shuttle with that payload assist module.
That was fun to watch when you could watch a live deploy there.
Yep.
And watch that thing spinning around there, and it pops up out of
Oh,
its
yeah,
cradle
yeah.
there. Well, we have a Department of Defense mission, top secret there, with a
Classified
beautiful,
mission.
iconic. I love that imagery of our shuttle and the Eagle, and just all that makes me want to stand up and be an American.
Bruce Shaw and Dick Richards commanding and piloting that flight. And of course, the very distinctive one of what I call our Eagle patches, which are always beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got the shuttle coming back home through the atmosphere with the red, white, and blue shockwave behind it. And the Eagle with its talons spread, and it makes for a beautiful patch. Of course, you know, who knows what was accomplished up there, but as several of the people who flew these DOT missions, they're asked, what'd you do up there during that classified mission? He said, well, we were doing God's work. So that's basically as far as the conversation will go.
Jim Adamson is a local
Jim Adamson,
astronaut
right,
that I've enjoyed meeting, and
Yeah.
Jim's comment is, we had some interesting assets aboard.
Sure, that's all you have to say.
Yeah, and this is one of the first defense top secret missions, and if you follow them, and we will, want to stay curious one day, you'll see 8 quick Department of Defense missions in 3 years, and the Iron Curtain came down.
Now on the lower right, you see astronaut Dave Leesma, and I was privileged several years ago to fly at a air combat maneuvering school in Atlanta, Georgia, called Sky Warriors, and one of my instructors was a pilot who'd flown with Dave Leesma. Dave was in the back seat of the F-14. And he told me, he said, you know, Dave was so good that he could make those radars jump up on their hind legs and bark. So glad about that. So years later, when I got a chance to work with Dave, I passed that comment on to him. I said, I flew with one of your pilots, and he said, you could make those radars jump up and on their hind legs and bark. And Dave just kind of smiled and he said, well, that depended upon how big the dog was in the front seat.
That's a good one. He's a Hall of Fame astronaut, and he introduced Roy Bridges at the event there.
There we have Mark Brown, and who we've been privileged to work with earlier this year, and General Adamson there. And they are, I think they're unpacking a food locker there. I think I see a drink bag in the foreground.
Yeah.
But
that's the gallery. Galley.
The galley just behind Mark's shoulder there. And then you see a series of circuit breakers up there in the upper right-hand portion of the picture, several of which had to be reset when you got up on orbit. And that whole process took the better part of 2.5 hours.
Really?
Converting that vehicle from a rocket to a spacecraft.
Huh. That's interesting.
41D, the maiden flight of the orbiter Discovery, and a flight that had a lot of great firsts, including one of the most beautiful patches in the program. You can see the sailing ship Discovery linked by that red, white, and blue ribbon to the spacecraft Discovery. You can see the deploy of the OST, which is the experimental solar panel, coming up out of the payload bay there. And our crew, Henry Hartsfield and Mike Coates as commander and pilot. And our mission specialists, Mike Mullane, Steve Hawley, Judy Resnick, and Charlie Walker. I had the pleasure of doing shows with both Mike Mullane and Charlie Walker. Charlie Walker is the first shuttle astronaut I ever met.
Oh, is he?
And he tells some wonderful stories. Now, Charlie, remember, was not a NASA astronaut. He was an astronaut from McDonnell Douglas flying an experiment known as the Continuous Flow Electrophoresis Experiment. And this was an experiment having to do with the manufacture of pharmaceuticals in the microgravity environment. So Charlie comes to us 3 or 4 times a year and tells some remarkable stories. And he's very much like Sam Durant's, in that when he talks about seeing the Earth from up on orbit, when he describes it, you get the feeling that he saw it just yesterday. He brings that freshness and that excitement to his description. Mm-hmm. Here he is working with the Cephas package. He flew this experiment on 3 different shuttle flights, and he had, previous to that, he had trained 4 different astronaut crews to use this hardware up in space. Now, Charlie will tell you that when he came on board as a payload specialist, there were some astronauts who were not too happy because they considered that he was taking a seat from them that they could have flown. But I think Charlie more than proved himself over his the course of his 3 space flights, in that he was an excellent addition to any crew that he flew with.
Yeah, lucky man. 3 flights in like 2 years, 2.5 years.
Yep.
Some people wait years before there are other flights in there.
Absolutely.
And you ever get a chance to see Charlie Walker in any event he's at, you will really enjoy a wonderful guy that, like Nick says, got a great appreciation for what he's done. There's the crew there.
Go back to that deploy picture that we had. Oh, well, let's go over the crew real quick. Bottom row from your left to right is Mike Mullane, Steve Hawley, Hank Hartsfield, Mike Coates, and up top we've got Charlie and Judy Resnick. It's a fine crew picture. As I say, we've also had the pleasure of working with Mike before. Mike, of course, who is the author of the famous book known as Riding Rockets.
Yeah.
And it's a book that people are still enjoying to this day. It's, in some places, it's laugh out loud funny. In other places, it's quite serious.
Yeah.
So Mike tells the whole story in the broad strokes from start to finish, and it's a remarkable book. Mike has got a wonderful family who he brings down whenever he's worked with us. Brings the whole family down. We would usually get together for dinner one night while he was here, and his wife Donna is an incredible lady, and his family is just remarkable. And he's now spending time with his family and doing traveling. And one of the more recent things he did was he climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. So
really?
He's not letting any dust grow beneath his feet.
Huh. Mike Mullane's book, Riding Rockets, that's a must for anybody. It really gives you a candid look at astronaut training and the whole experience. yet it's not a big tome that you have to read of all kind of detailed stuff. So, and of course, Judy, we can't, we've got to say that she, of course, lost her life in Challenger. Judy Resnick, I can't read enough about her.
We've got
Such an intelligent lady.
Got a close-up picture of her. Let's take a look at the Yost deploy here. This was an experimental solar panel deployed from the payload bay of the orbiter, and when it was deployed, it measured some 120 feet in length, and when it was collapsed back into its package, that package was only about 16 inches deep.
Really?
So you talk about an engineering marvel, and there was the whole idea of what are we going to do if we deploy it and we can't bring it back in? Well, we'll have to jettison it. So Judy was in charge of the deploy of that experimental solar panel. And very famously, during the simulations, as they run this thing out and then they lock it in place, Judy would report to Mission Control, it's out and it's big. So she did that a few times, and somebody said, you're not going to say that up on orbit. She said, yes, I am. And that's exactly what she said when it was locked into place. It's out and it's big.
They tease each other about a lot of things. I love the reflection of the OMS pod and the stabilizer.
If you look at closer, you're actually looking through that solar panel to see the ohms pods.
Yeah, you're looking through it. That's right.
That's how thinly constructed that solar mass was. So it was, as I say, it was an engineering marvel, and it proved what we eventually did on International Space Station. Of course, years ahead, we would run into some difficulties with the close up and redeploy of those panels on the International Space Station. We'd suffer what we call striction, where the panels would stick together when we were redeploying. So again, you learn those problems and you pass through them, you make the repairs, and you move on from there.
The first third of the shuttle era, the first doing everything that the last third built the ISS
Yeah,
for.
absolutely. You definitely have three distinctive chapters in the Space Shuttle story. And this was, as I say, part of the second chapter.
And you can't underestimate how important that this experiment went right, because this was they're betting that this was the way to power the ISS on there. Yeah. So there's Charlie
and the Cephas.
And
here's an example of what it's like to sleep on board the orbiter. This is in the middeck. You got Charlie on the left and Mike on the right. And if you look closely at Mike, you see he's got that band velcroed around his head. And some of the astronauts needed to feel the pressure of a pillow on the back of their head in order to sleep. And of course, you don't get that in zero-G because your head floats around. So some of the guys took to using this particular device, which gave them that pressure on the back of their head and allowed them to sleep at night. You see they're wearing the eye shades because it is, even with the lights turned out, it can tend to be bright sometimes, and so the eye shades again just gave you a better sleep. Judy Resnick on the middeck, and if you look closely, that little sign floating to her right says "Hi, Dad," very close to her father, and also you look at one of her lockers there, and the bumper sticker says "I love Tom Selleck." She was a great Tom Selleck fan. She invited Tom to the launch of Challenger, but unfortunately, or fortunately, depending upon how you look at it, Tom was not able to attend that launch. But she was a big fan of Tom Selleck. And among the astronauts, she was, I would say, I would call her a free spirit. She was one of the boys. You didn't have to walk on eggshells when you talked to her. And she was likely to give as good as she got when it came to practical jokes and jibes and so forth. And the office halls are full of great Judy Resnick stories. She was, by all intents and purposes, a remarkable woman, and I'm just sorry that I never got a chance to meet her.
She, Nick, she was the sixth girl to have a perfect score on her SAT college entrance exam. And perfect score, folks. She was going to go to the School of Juilliard, where she was a child prodigy on the piano, and she went to Carnegie Mellon Engineering, which is like, hard to get into. But yeah, we missed a lot that she probably would have done in the world there.
Judy was also probably the neck-and-neck finalist with Sally Ride to be the first woman to fly in space. They both tested out very well on the remote manipulator arm. because of their hand-eye coordination. Sally because of her time as a tennis player, and Judy because of her time as a pianist. The one thing that edged it out from one supposition I read was that Judy did not particularly care for the limelight and the publicity and all the rest of that jazz, and it was understood that the first American woman in space was going to be the recipient of a lot of publicity. They felt that Sally would be able to handle that role quite well, which of course she did. And Judy went on to press on with a great flight on STS-41D, and she's still sorely missed. And we can only imagine some of the things that she might have been able to contribute to the program had she lived.
Absolutely, and I don't know if there's really a good autobiography or biography about her.
I don't think so, and to be honest, if Judy were still alive, she wouldn't want one written. She was a very private person,
right? Exactly,
and I don't think that was her bag at all. She would have gone on. She would have led her life. She would have led a good life, probably finding several different ways to give back to the program, education, and so forth. And as I say, we certainly lost a lot, because as I think of the potential of what she might have accomplished on later shuttle flights, and then in her post-NASA career, I think it would have been formidable. She was an incredible woman.
Absolutely. Big loss there. Well, we move on to STS-43. I like calling it Richard Petty mission. Great NASCAR driver's number 43.
That is the tracking data relay satellite we see in the payload bay of the orbiter there. And surrounding the orbiter is the shadow, the image of the Mercury capsule. Because at the time we were celebrating the anniversary of Project Mercury, and Mike Baker, who designed the patch, wanted to add a tip of the hat to Project Mercury, and he came up with that design, and then the gradient blue shockwaves behind the orbiter. So it's a very beautiful, very meaningful patch.
John Blaha, the commander, turned 81 years old Saturday.
Yeah. Remarkable career of John Blaha.
Absolutely. And Jim Adamson, this is his second flight of his two flights, both in the month of August, and he was actually like August 4th to 7th or something like that on both missions, juxtaposed in history. But I like stuff like that. And then we lost David Lowe to cancer.
Yeah, and Dave Lowe, remember, was the son of George Lowe, who was one of the Mount Rushmore guys of the program. It was George's idea to send Apollo 8 around the moon. So he was a remarkable man.
And Shannon Lucid,
a very inspirational life. She was born in a Japanese prisoner of war camp in Shanghai, China. Her family were missionaries that were captured by the Japanese.
I didn't know that, a prisoner of war camp.
She was born in a POW camp. After the war, the family went back to Oklahoma, and Shannon pursued her education. And not only her education, but her love for flying. She became one of the first women to get a commercial pilot's license, when women weren't doing a lot of that back in the day. Shannon went on, of course, to be selected along with the first 6 women in the program, with the 35 new guys in 1978. And she stayed with the program all the way to the end of the shuttle program. I remember seeing her serving as Capcom on some of the space station missions. So she has a long, proud history with the space program. In this picture, starting on the left, there's G. David Lowe, and then Shannon upside down. Right. This is a picture the guys like to do all the time, with the right side up and upside down. General Jim Adamson, and then after that, our mission commander, John Blaha. And to the right, our pilot, Mike Bakes, who's been a frequent guest of ours over at the Visitors Complex. And Bakes tells some remarkable stories about his involvement with the program while he was in Moscow, serving as the NASA lead in Russia, the DOR, as they call it, Director of Operations Russia. And the people that he met, and then the people he later on worked with after his career at NASA. And it's a fascinating story, because he talks a lot about the cultural differences between the Americans and the Russians, and it's very enlightening. And whenever Mike is in town and at the Visitors Complex, I highly recommend that you come by and see his show, ask him the questions, and learn a lot of the back page story about the American-Russian relationship that didn't make it to the newspapers.
Yeah, he's awesome. He'll be back October 19th
Yeah.
for 3 days. He really loves it. He
Yeah.
loves talking to you, the space lovers out there. He does it at Johnson Space Center where he lives. They have a different program he told
Yeah.
me about. They don't
Well,
do it.
he surprises people when he first comes out on stage because he now shaves his head. He's completely
Yes,
bald.
yes.
I told him he's got the Lex Luthor look.
He does.
But,
He does. Exactly.
As I say, he tells a remarkable story. If you want to come to understand the relationship between the Americans and the Russians in the Shuttle Mir program and then into the space station program, Mike's the guy to tell you that story. Now, John Blaha, a good friend of ours who's been with us several times, he's retired from the Astronaut Encounter game, but he and his wife live in Texas, loving their grandkids and enjoying life. And Blaha, of course, has got a remarkable history with NASA. After his first flight as pilot, he was brought on board STS-33 with Fred Gregory because the original pilot for that flight was killed in a plane crash. That would have been Dave Griggs. So John took that pilot spot, flew again, and then went on to command flights of his own. And he tells some great stories, and he has remarkable insight into the early days of the shuttle program, remarkable insights into the selection process of those early shuttle astronauts. So he tells a great story, and John, if you and Brenda are listening, God bless you, and I hope you're enjoying life with the grandkids in Texas.
I hope you are. Interesting side note, this was Bakes. He was the pilot, rookie pilot.
Yeah.
His commander, John Blaha. On then his last command, his fourth flight, Baker picked up Blaha
From
at the Mir Space
Space
Station.
Right.
And I asked him if they had a moment or something, and you've met him. They didn't.
Yeah.
He goes, "Yeah." We said, "Hey, good to see you
good to see you,
again."
man. Yeah.
I was like,
What have you been up to?
Yeah. But I love making stuff that's just so cool that would be happening there.
Yeah.
And they love
Yeah,
that.
the
That's
crew
one of the
lined
coolest crew photos.
Beautiful, beautiful
Yeah.
picture with the orbiter
Yeah,
on the sunset.
and,
And this is a picture, one of the pictures from the mission, and this is one of those great edge-on views of the Earth's atmosphere, where you really understand. If you look from the darkness up to the blue, that distance is about from here to Orlando.
Mhm.
That's all we've got. So you've got the beautiful clouds too in the foreground. On the left, I think you've got a thunderstorm building up there, probably somewhere on the order of 35 to 40,000 feet high. But this is a wonderful illustration of the fact that, we've just got that one thin layer of atmosphere that protects all forms of life on this planet. And I think it's a very, very instructive picture. Many of the astronauts say they see that view and they realize how fragile the Earth is.
Mm-hmm.
However, Kathy Thornton, one of our friends, she said that she looks at the Earth and she says to herself, no, the Earth is strong and resilient. It's people who are fragile.
Oh,
I think
okay.
that puts it into very good
That
perspective.
does put you in perspective. After all, our world's been around 5 billion years.
It was here before us and will be here after us.
65 million years ago, these gigantic lizards were all over the place. It's just amazing what we've gone through. Well, here's another great mission, great American mission.
STS-51I, one of our wonderful Eagle patches, and of course, both of Joe Engle's flights featured the Eagle in the mission patch. And here you see the Eagle speeding forward with the bow wave in front of it, and in the shock wave, the 19 stars that represent the previous 19 Space Shuttle flights. So again, a beautiful Eagle patch from the program. Joe Engle, of course, an X-15 pilot, and a pilot of considerable skill, and his pilot Dick Covey, who went on to do some wonderful things in the
First
shuttle
two
program.
on the bottom there,
Right.
and Joe turned 91 years old Saturday.
And then up on the top, you've got Ox Van Hoften, James Van Hoften, and in the middle, Mike Lounge, and to the right, Bill Fisher, at the time the husband of our friend Anna Fisher. And this mission featured the deploy of 3 commercial communication satellites, and then also the retrieval and repair of that CINCOM satellite that you see right there. Now, you look to the right of the satellite and you'll see Ox Van Hoften at the end of the arm. He's just spun that satellite up, and he's basically deploying that satellite by hand, which again was a very remarkable feat in the shuttle program. Now, this satellite was actually a part of one of Charlie Walker's missions, in that on that flight, they had attempted to repair the satellite. That's when they constructed the fly swatter and put it on the end of the RMS and attempted to throw that power switch. They were not successful, but the guys on the ground said, well, no problem. The stuff you've done now shows us where the problem is, and we're going to solve it on the next available flight, which was 51I. And basically what they did on 51I was they constructed a power box, a jumper box, attached it to the satellite that caused it to react properly, put it on the timer to eventually fire its apogee kick motor to put it into a proper geostationary orbit. So again, the saving of another satellite, another umpteen $1 million for the U.S. taxpayer.
A year apart, that was 1985.
Yeah. And there again, we see the deploy of one of the satellites in the Frisbee mode. Again, that was visually spectacular to see one of those things come out of the payload bay in that configuration. That is a similar SYNCOM satellite, and you can see the antenna array in its stowed position. It would later be deployed, and then the apogee kick motor would be fired. And
August of 1985, the age of innocence for the shuttle was about over, though.
Well, I remember
in January it would all change, but this was the workhorse. This is what they sold it to the bill of goods that it was going to do.
And eventually, of course, our goal was to use the shuttle to build a space station. But until we got the Congress to come up with the money and the commitment to proceed with that, we had several other things that we were able to do. And one of those items was the deploy of commercial communication satellites, which was done quite well. Here's Joe Henry up on the flight deck. Again, as I say, Joe Engle, an X-15 pilot, space shuttle pilot, would have originally been on the crew of Apollo 17, but was bumped by Jack Schmitt, since that was going to be the last landing, and science community wanted a geologist on that mission. So regretfully, Joe Henry lost that seat to Jack Schmitt. And here we have the crew up on orbit on another typical family view on the flight deck. On the left, we've got, again, Mike Lounge, and then Bill Fisher, Joe Henry in the middle, and then Dick Covey, our pilot, and then, excuse me, I think I've got Mike Lounge on the right, Ox Van Hoften on the left. I get mixed up when I see all the mustaches.
Yeah. Is this urban legend, or do you know for a fact that Joe was offered to fly either one of the Skylab missions or the ASTP and turned it down because he wanted to fly a winged spaceship?
No, I hadn't heard that.
It makes sense, though, don't you think?
It wouldn't surprise me.
Deke offered him whatever you want to do, because
Joe was a stick and rudder guy, and that was his meat and potatoes. On the other hand, I can't see an astronaut turning down a spaceflight opportunity, to tell you the truth. And after all, he was not going to be flying wheels and wings on Apollo 17 if he'd gotten that. So I don't think he had any particular objection to flying a spacecraft of the Apollo type. But I would expect that after the Apollo program, when he saw the shuttle program on the rise, and I'm sure he was really anxious to get his teeth into that.
91 years old there, the only man to fly 2 reusable spaceships.
And told some wonderful stories at an X-15 pilots reunion years and years ago.
That'd been awesome.
He was doing the X-15 in a free flight without power, just to get the handling characteristics of the airplane. And he was coming in at such an angle that he couldn't see over the nose, see the field. So he did what any pilot would do. He'd roll the vehicle over and dish the nose out so he could see where his runway was. So when he got on the ground, one of the guys asked him, he said, "Joe, did you roll that airplane?" He said, "Who, me?" And then he ended up getting called into Paul Bickle's office, who was program manager. And Paul asked him, he said, "Joe Henry, did you roll that airplane?" And Engel said he really had to think about it, and he said, "Yeah, I did." And Mr. Bickle said, "We don't do that with this airplane." So
space jet.
That's right. That's right. But
yeah, he did, and they probably got some data out of it.
Sure they did. So Joe Henry, remarkable career in wing flight and aerospace.
Really owe a lot. America owes a lot to him and his aviation skills, pushing the envelope up there again.
Here's a picture of a hurricane taken from 51I, and again, the incredible disconnect between the savage power of this storm and the absolute beauty of it when seen from 150 to 200 miles up in orbit. And you can see that well-defined eye in the middle, and you can track the rotation of the storm. So it's at once beautiful and at the same time terrible. You look at it and you think about how beautiful nature is, and then you think about the destruction and the carnage that thing's going to cause as it moves across land. But
we're on a little alert here. Our Wednesday may be affected.
We've seen some weather coming up here come Wednesday.
Hurricane
but of course, it's
coming across the Gulf.
Two things. It's still early, and we're talking about the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
And when a hurricane gets loose in the Gulf of Mexico, all bets are off as far as trying to track it. We've seen time and time again where we projected it going in one direction, and all of a sudden it'll hang a left and do something else. So once you turn one of these things loose in the Gulf, I just think it just behooves you to be ready. Just be ready. I mean, across the board, not just on the West Coast, but on the East Coast too.
Yeah.
So and, I would, just as a PSA here, I would just remind everybody we got time here. Let's go ahead and start checking our kits at home, our hurricane kits, make sure that we've got plenty of the supplies that we need. If you do have to get things at the grocery store, please remember there are other people behind you who need supplies too. So be thinking about that and acting accordingly.
Yeah, get what you need. Don't hoard it. Wednesday's our impact day. And Nick, you're more experienced than, of course, I am here, but it could take a hard right.
Can do anything.
We're pretty good. Wednesday will be the impact day, and you never know what's going to happen.
We don't know where it'll go. We don't know how powerful it'll be. It'll be when it gets here.
But it is hottest Gulf of Mexico water we've had in record been kept, and so we don't know what all is going to happen. But we're going to talk more about shuttles here with Nick Thomas. We got a few more to go in the month of August here. Boy, this looks like a coloring book.
Very, very beautiful, very colorful patch for STS-85. A lot of accomplishments on this flight, not the least of which was the deploy of the Crystal SPAS payload. And that payload had a series of telescopes and spectrometers on it. And what they wanted to do was to examine the activity in the Earth's middle atmosphere. So that was a deployable satellite using the robot arm. It was deployed, it free flew for 9 days, and then we retrieved it and brought it back home. One of our payload specialists on that flight, Jan Davis, was the operator on the RMS of that during that particular flight. There's the crew all together there. We've got Kurt Brown to the right of the patch. There's Kurt Brown, our commander. To the left of the patch, that would be Doc Horowitz, who is our pilot. And then up top, we've got our mission specialist, Bob Kerbeam, and that was Bob's first flight. And then Steve Robinson, Jan Davis next to him. And then from Canada, we have Bjarne Tryggvason, who we had at the visitors center many years ago.
Oh, did you?
Bjarne has since passed away.
Oh.
But he was a representative for Canada on that flight. And Jan Davis there on the top row. Jan is, as I say, was a mission specialist working that deploy and retrieval of the Crystal SPAS. And Jan has recently written a book.
Yeah, we've got that. Yeah. We'll jump ahead to her book there.
Yeah, her book is entitled Airborne, and you notice the spelling of it, 2 words, airborne, born of the air, because her father, you see in the right of this image, her father was the pilot of a B-17 during World War II. Several combat missions, regretfully was shot down, was captured, survived, and came back home and started his family. And what Jan is going to do in this book, as I've read the advanced copy on it, she's going to draw parallels between her father's career as a pilot and her time flying on board the Space Shuttle. And I think, as they would say in the publishing houses, this hadn't been done before. Mm-hmm. And this is a perspective I've never seen before, and I'm very anxious to read this book. I pre-ordered mine today. It's available for pre-order on Amazon. And it's going to be a fascinating story, tying those 2 careers and those 2 lives together, the things that she learned about her father and her father's career, and the connection between the flight of a B-17 and the flight of a space shuttle. So I'm looking forward to reading this book. And anybody out there who's interested in reading books about the astronaut stories, it's got to be number one on your list, because it's going to be very exciting, and I think it's going to be very inspirational too for people of all ages. And this is something I think the young people need to learn about, not only about the grand relationship between Jan and her father, but the history of the World War II B-17 pilot and what was involved there, and how that relates to what Jan experienced on board the Space Shuttle. So I'm looking forward to it.
Has she been a visitor?
No, not yet. We've been talking to her about this book, and very much like to see her on board with us, say sometime next year, because she has obviously got a fascinating story to tell. So,
well, Winston Scott's the chief astronaut out there now, and Winston will bring on some new people, probably.
So, Jan, if you're out there listening, we'll look forward to having you on board.
Love to have her on. Yeah. Love to see a book signing out there, Nick.
Yeah, let's go back one image. I think we've got the Christus. Oh, no, we've got Rommel, Kent Rominger in the pilot seat, and this is on the launch pad. And again, if you compare this with the image you saw of the shuttle during the approach and landing test, you can see the shuttle is now very heavily instrumented. You can see the overhead switches for the interfeed and crossfeed and interconnects for the RCS and the ohms, the comm switches, and then the center panel just on Rommel's left, a lot of the switches for first communicating with computers, and then also the manual switches for manual jettison of the SRBs or manual jettison of the external fuel tank. So
this is 1997.
Yeah.
So they hadn't brought in any of the glass cockpit things.
No, it's all before. It's all steam gauge.
Yeah.
Here the crew again, the traditional crew up on orbit, floating in zero gravity, and you just look at these pictures and it's like, yeah, we got a lot of work to do, but damn, we're gonna have fun doing it.
Yeah. Commander Brown, one of our most experienced 6 times.
Kurt was the commander of the mission that took John Glenn back into space.
Absolutely, yeah. He was, and he's president of the Scholarship Foundation now. Yeah. And they're still very active.
Yeah. STS-105, this was one of the workhorse missions during the 3rd chapter of the shuttle program. And this was a mission to carry supplies and logistics, and also crews to do a crew change on board the International Space Station.
2001?
Yep. You see those crews lined up. Doc Horowitz was, again, our pilot. C.J. Sturkow, Rick Sturkow was our commander. And again, props to the Marine Corps, C.J. Sturkow. And I'll tell you a great story about C.J.'s first flight as a commander. I was in the office with Wendy Lawrence watching his first launch. And usually when the crew came out of the van and got to the launch pad, they'd take a moment to look up at the vehicle and have a moment with each other and, you know, a handshake kind of a thing, and then over to the elevator. Well, when the van got up there and the doors opened, CJ's crew went straight to the elevator. No nonsense, you know, just mission straight ahead and all business. And we watched that happen, and Wendy laughed and she said, "Oh, CJ, you're such a Marine." Now this picture, we see the shuttle crew and the 2 crews to be rotated, one crew coming up and one crew going down. We see Susan Helms over there on the left, Jim Voss, and Frank Culbertson over the crew on the right. But yeah, these missions were very important during the shuttle program to keep the crews rotating through the International Space Station. And of course, even before the end of the shuttle program, we pretty much turned crew rotation over to the Soyuz vehicle, because we knew eventually the shuttle was going to be brought home for its last time, but we had to keep these crews rotating through the station, and that's what Soyuz helped us do. And now we see another very, very exciting picture of all 3 crews together on board the International Space Station, and just remarkable. Again, you've got this picture of people up there working hard, doing some very important things, and in a very dangerous environment, but you can see the smiles on their faces. They're glad to be there, and it's in many cases the fulfillment of a childhood dream. Others a little more recent, but nevertheless there's a sense of excitement and happiness on that crew's face as they're up there gathered on board the ISS.
That was in 2001, 10 of them up there.
Yeah.
We've got 11 on the shuttle right now. I mean, the space station right now, but the space station in 2001 was not even a third of what it is today.
And I think our highest number of people on board station at any given time was 13.
Yes, yes, exactly. And so this crew, this landed on August 22nd, and just to reset history, then September 11th was the attack on our country, and Culbertson was up there, took the famous pictures of the World Trade Towers burning up there. So how quickly our attitude about life changed after this mission, for sure.
Yeah, and Frank talked about the fact that, here we are in this beautiful and peaceful and exciting environment, and we have to look down and see something like this. It was just something that just kind of tore into your spirit. The best of mankind and the worst of mankind all happening 250 miles from each other. The
only American in space at that time, too, seeing our country attacked. Life goes on, and we've overcome those challenges, of course. Let's go to another mission here.
STS-118, a mission that took the S5 truss and control moment gyro up to the International Space Station. Again, a fantastic crew, and on board a good friend of ours, Barbara Morgan. Barbara's been with us for many years now over at the Astronaut encounter, and here they are in a picture in front of the image of the shuttle. And so on the left, from left to right, we've got Rick Mastracchio, and then Barbara, and then our pilot, Scorch.
Hobaugh there.
Charlie Hobaugh. And then one of the Kelly boys, I've given up trying to tell one from the other.
Yeah, that one's Scott.
That's Scott?
My notes.
Okay, all right. And then next to us, we have Tracy, T.C. Dyson, Tracy Caldwell, now Tracy Caldwell Dyson. Next to her, Dave Williams from Canada. And next to him, Al Drew. Now, Dave did that spacewalk, changing out the control moment gyro on the International Space Station. And it was a very important moment for him because here he was, a Canadian, being moved by the Canadian robot arm and carrying a piece of Canadian hardware, that control moment gyro. So everyone is very concerned about that because
is that him,
that's Dave there with a little bit of tea or iced tea in front of him floating in the void there. But the concern was that when you're on that arm and you're being moved from place to place, you're holding that control moment gyro, which was several hundred pounds. And if you came to a sudden stop, well, F equals ma, the momentum of that CMG could tear you right out of the foot restraints, although you were still tethered to the RMS. So that was something they're watching very closely as they're moving him from one to the other. Charlie Hobaugh was working the arm at the time. And as Barbara tells it, the arm moved very, very slowly and directly to its program place, and then stopped very gently, very smoothly, no problem. And after it was all said and done, Dave called down and said, "Charlie, just want to thank you for that smooth ride on the robot arm. It was just perfect." And Charlie came back and said, "Well, no problem, Dave. The arm was in auto the whole time."
Really? That's interesting.
It was an exciting mission. And again, here we are. We're expanding the envelope as far as our EVA skills are concerned. We're expanding the envelope on our repair ability on the International Space Station.
That robotic arm of Canada is really...
it's priceless, and it's been priceless on the space station,
absolutely.
And it's going to be priceless on the Gateway Space Station orbiting the moon.
And Marty, were you with me when we heard somebody talking, and they said there's still yet a spaceship that has not been built yet that has an arm on the spaceship? Itself, a robotic arm.
Well, there have been discussions, I know, of adding a robot arm to other manned vehicles. I don't know how far along those discussions are. There was some talk about adding it to a Dragon vehicle that could rendezvous with the Hubble Space Telescope and do some repair, but there's some engineering problems there. I don't know if that's going to happen. But all that notwithstanding, the robot arm has done so much for us on board the shuttle, on board the International Space Station, and it will do on the Gateway Space Station up in lunar orbit. So you can't think of spaceflight anymore without including a robot arm, because it's it's able to do so many things for
And
you.
the experts at it is the Canadian Space Agency.
Yeah.
So
Our buddy, Barbara Morgan, here floating in the middeck. Now, if you look to the left of Barbara, you see a bag. That's a bag of basil seeds that were taken up there as part of an experiment. And the
basil.
yeah.
The
And as the astronaut said, that when they took those basil seeds out of the locker, the middeck was just filled with this beautiful, sweet aroma of basil seeds, which is I always think of when I see this this image. Of course, Barbara there, who was the backup for Chris McAuliffe on STS-51L, and then eventually joined NASA as a full-fledged mission specialist, flew on this mission on STS-118, worked on the robot arm, and coming home now and working with us at the Astronaut Encounter now for several years. She is amazing. Again, she, like Sam Durrance and Charlie Walker, she brings that first-time excitement whenever she talks about seeing the Earth from space. She brings such power and grace to her presentation, and of course her presentations are always heavily attended by students. And I can recall distinctly the first time we had a big mass of students in there. As soon as she came out on stage, all the cameras came up and they're all videoing the thing. And Barbara said, "Guys, I want you to shut the cameras off, put them in your pocket, and listen. You know, you can't simply, record something like this and expect to get all the good from it that you can by just listening." So again, in the classic teacher's mold, God bless her. I think it was good for her to make that call. But again, the great thing about her presentations is the warmth and the humor and the sense of wonder that she brings to that whole experience as she describes it to an audience. And she gets not just the kids. It's not the kids who are inspired, but the older people, those of us who lived through that flight and subsequent space missions. She brings that wonder and that continuum of exploration that is so important for us to emphasize. And you've never met a funnier, a warmer, and a kinder person than Barbara. I've been privileged to go out to dinner with her and her husband Clay several times. And, you just have to prize from the table. We just get on, we start talking, and we just can't stop. So she's just a remarkable, remarkable person. So next time she's on the docket, be sure to come by and see Barbara.
And she, like you mentioned, Charlie Walker, they're people that you can relate to, that you can say, like, wow, if she could do it, I could do it. When I'm around Terry Wilcutt or Mike Baker or someone like that, these guys are pilots. Those guys are, no, I could never be an astronaut like them. But because the pilots and the commanders are a different cut of mold than the mission specialists, and then you got the payload specialists, and that's why I think people are so endeared to her, because she just makes it feel like you can do this if you really put your mind to it.
Well, I think even going beyond that, I think Barbara underscores the power of the difference that can be made by the individual. Now, all the guys will tell you that you're a member of a team up there and you're working together, and she's a great team member. But as an individual, having come home from that mission and going out and preaching the evangel, if you will, of inspiring young people, she's out there, she's making a difference, she's getting it done, and we always enjoy having her at the visitor center.
Don't miss her out there. Barbara Morgan there.
We did suffer some tile damage on that mission. We did have, again, a piece of foam come off the external fuel tank, impact the underbelly. This is one of the images that were taken from the space station when the orbiter did that rotational pitch maneuver for the tile inspection, so we caught this. But again, the engineers were able to analyze that and decide that this was not going to be an issue for entry. You always look at these things, of course, very, very closely. And if you're involved in making that examination, you want to make damn sure that you're making the right decision. And so that analysis was very integral, and they finally came across with a green flag for entry.
Well, tomorrow we've got Terry White, the Orbital Processing Facility Manager, and I may throw that in there.
Throw that up and ask Terry to speak about that. Sure.
Because I understand the black tiles are the ones that are replaced, so those would all been replaced in that area.
Now, not all. Normally, on average, after a flight, we would repair or replace fewer than 100 tiles. You couldn't just blanket replace 32,000 tiles in one spot. You're never going to get a fleet flying if you did that. But if you saw damage like this, yes, certainly those tiles were going to be changed out. But not until a strict engineering accounting was made of that damage, and then once the book was closed on that, then you could make the change out.
Absolutely. Well, and there's our International Space Station.
Beautiful
As we saw
spacecraft.
it, is this in for the next mission in 2009? Is that when you pulled that
Yeah,
one
that
up?
was when Nicole Stott and her crew were up there.
Yes, right.
And so,
2009.
yeah, this,
Launched today, August 28th.
yeah. So
Up there for about 10 or 12 days.
happy anniversary, Nicole.
That's right. Our great friend Nicole Stott and her husband Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the old vineyard wine cellar there.
Oh, Jose
Hernandez
yeah,
on this flight
absolutely.
here.
Yeah, our
And,
friend Jose,
and
who's
Stutkow, the commander, is now
CJ.
flying Virgin Galactic.
right.
So,
So he's still in the business.
so what'd you pick out for highlights on this one, Nick?
Well, let's see. Of course, this mission was a logistics mission, supplies, hardware, and equipment to and from the space station. We're wrapping up the program, so this is a time when we want to take every advantage of that cargo capability of the shuttle orbiter to bring hardware up and to bring hardware back. We had 3 EVAs during this mission, as I'll recall, and we have again as our commander CJ Sturkow, Rick Sturkow, and his pilot on the mission was Kevin Ford. And then along on the flight, we have up on the top row, starting on the left, we got Jose Hernandez. I think that's Daniel Levis there. There's Nicole, and gosh, who do I see there next? Pat Forster on the far end. But we have, is that
Ford.
Krister? Is that Krister Fuglesang?
Um,
Because I see the flag up there.
oh, yes.
That's Krister.
Yes.
I can see his flag on his left sleeve. So that's Krister Fuglesang. And after him, Pat Forrester. So again, a crew that took supplies, hardware, and equipment up the station. And our team,
And Nicole Stott. They
Right.
dropped her off.
yeah.
And then it brought back Tim Copra.
Tim Copra. So 2 of our friends on board that vehicle, Nicole and Jose Hernandez. Jose, I would tell you, TierraLuna.com for
Yes.
Jose's website and his excellent wines that he sells. And a very inspirational story of Jose Hernandez, who started his life as a young boy with a family of migrant workers who came over from Mexico. From those humble beginnings, he became an astronaut. And again, when he comes to the astronaut encounter presentations, he tells a very inspiring story about watching the mission of Apollo 17 walking on the moon and telling his father, "That's what I want to do. I want to be an astronaut." And his father said, "No, you want to do what?" And he said, "Yeah, I want to be an astronaut." And his father looked him right in the eye and says, "I think you can do it." Now, what kind of better encouragement can you get from that? But then his father laid out a roadmap for him. The thing that you have to do as you advance toward a goal like this. And Jose took up on those lessons and followed them diligently until such time as he was able to fly 250 miles above the Earth on board the Space Shuttle. So a very inspiring story with Jose Hernandez.
It is an amazing story. And
yeah.
they've done a Netflix movie
Yep.
on this.
Yep.
I think they just released. And Nick, that story you told, I'm just going to add one little thing to it. When he told his dad he wanted to go to the fly in space, his dad said, "Go in the kitchen, right
yeah.
now."
That was
And he
usually
said 3 things happened
3 things
in the
that
kitchen.
happened in there, and one of them wasn't very
Right.
good.
What
But it was.
what were those
Well,
things?
the 3 things were
They ate.
our mother served us breakfast. The second thing was our mother served us lunch and oversaw our studies. And then the third one was you were brought in there to be given a lesson.
Be
and
disciplined.
Be disciplined, right. And he thought for sure that he'd already done the first 2 things today, so he was afraid it was going to be the belt. But in point of fact,
The belt.
in
Yeah,
point of fact, his
exactly.
father sat down with him and gave him the most inspirational advice he could imagine. And that's advice that Jose passes on to following generations
Yeah,
now during
it,
his show. And it's just, again,
It is an amazing story to have your father talk to you the way he said his dad told him.
Yeah.
Okay, if you're going to do that, you're going to do this, this, and this, and it's going to be hard. But you know that's part of the Hispanic culture too. I think is just, they just really are so family oriented. But it is an awesome story, and I really enjoy him. We hope to trying to effort a wine tasting because we talked about it last time he was out there, and he was perked up about it with your help there. Well,
I think what we do, we put the 3 glasses of his wine on the table. We'll try all 3, and I'll say, I like them all.
Well, we'll do a stay curious with that there. But yeah, Jose Hernandez up there in the upper left.
And
really a class act and really is giving it away.
Our other friend on board here in the center, Nicole Stott.
Love you, Nikki.
Beautiful.
Hope you're watching today.
Beautiful artist. She's brought back some of the most remarkable images and translated them into beautiful paintings. She also does work with children who have terminal illnesses, and she brings them such inspiration. I think, as I recall,
Space for Art Foundation.
And as I recall, she did the quilt that was taken up, or the mock spacesuit that was taken up on orbit to the International Space Station.
They take up a spacesuit that has art that is embellished all around it. Yeah, okay, it's up there. The Nyberg does the quilts.
I had the pleasure of meeting Nicole when we were
you're going to see one someday at our Shuttle Fest. I promise you, we will have one there.
We're transitioning Discovery, getting her ready to leave Kennedy and go to Washington, D.C. And as part of the celebration, we had the first crew of Discovery and the last crew of Discovery. And from the first crew, we had Hank Hartsfield and Charlie Walker. And from the final crew on Discovery, we had Nicole. So the 3 of us went out to the shuttle landing facility together and took pictures with the vehicle on top of the 747. Sorry, I forgot to send those pictures to you. But it was a remarkable time. She was a remarkable young woman who really gives voice to the concept of giving back. And she does that, and she does that exceptionally well. Not only by her inspiration whenever she tells the story of spaceflight, but by the personal commitment she's made to helping make people's lives better. So, Nikki, we're out there thinking of you, and we hope to see you again soon.
She's got a book, Return to Earth, Lessons That She Learned. Yeah. And it's all about she didn't know that much about global climate change until she was an astronaut and got to go to things. And she's embraced what she's learned with world authorities on things like that. And really one of the hardest working astronauts out there. Talking about Nicole Stott that was left up there for her 5-month stint on the International Space Station. I think it was Expedition 21, 22, somewhere now. Crew. We just had to end our little program here today. Nick, so grateful for you going over the Shuttles of August there. Hope that you enjoyed his personal insight to knowing some of these astronauts. And Expedition 69 meets Expedition 70 on the International Space Station.
Dragon Crew 7 just went up there.
In the blue flight suits there.
Jasmine McBelly in the front there, front right. Again, hoorah to the Marine Corps. Jasmine is a Marine Corps test pilot for helicopters.
Oh, yeah, one of those attack helicopters. Okay, that's
some serious stuff.
Yeah, some serious stuff.
And this is her first flight. She's flying as a commander, and this is her first flight. And we've got, as you say, a big number of people up there right now. We're getting ready to transition from one crew to Jasmine's crew. And life goes on board the International Space Station, 250 miles above the Earth.
That's right. 11 of humans in our space station, 5 nations represented, and the 6th nation orbiting the Earth is the 3 Takionauts in the China Heavenly Palace.
Now, the crew that just went up on Crew 7, headed up by Jasmine, that was a completely international crew.
Yes.
One from each different country. And I've had to go back and look in the manifests over the years, but I think that might be the first time we've ever had that. Each member being from a different nation.
Yeah, she was born in Iran and from Iranian parents, or she was born in Germany by Iranian parents or something like that. But she isn't American. But yeah, from birth, different countries. And, we just can't get enough of looking at our beautiful International Space Station. There's another picture of it with the only border that matters, as Nikki Stott reminds us, that thin blue line there. So, Nick, what a great look at the Shuttles of August. You really got into it this month. Thank you so much. All these personal anecdotes, as only Nick Thomas can tell them. 35 years he's been shaking hands with America's space heroes, men and women up there that have made a difference. I'm sure it's hard for you to think back that you've been doing this 4 decades.
Time passes rapidly, as Gordon Cooper said.
It does. But we're looking forward to a great fall of new astronauts out there. And anything to look forward to that you can let the cat out of the bag?
We're currently stocked as far as astronauts are concerned through October. Our next 3 months for selection will be November, December, and January. This year, we'll pretty much see people that we've seen before, the 40-some people we have in the office. But next year, we've been talking to a few new people that we might be able to see next year, so we're looking forward to that. But in any event, we're looking forward to continuing this program to inspire young people and to remind those of us who are older what we've accomplished and what we stand to accomplish in the years ahead. And also to remind people that we are now well on our way to going back to the moon and going on to Mars. We just had a great visit by the Artemis II crew and our administrator, Bill Nelson. They made some great comments on the importance of this mission, of this Artemis program. And as Reed Wiseman, the commander of the mission, said, this is not about 4 people on board Artemis II. This is about getting us eventually onto Mars. And we are just one step in that whole program, he said. So that's what I look at it as just being one single step in a long journey that will eventually carry us to the surface of Mars.
And we'll be there with you on Stay Curious. We thank watching today. Doug Forrest is in Los Angeles, Dave Stange up in Michigan, as is Bill Whiting. Robert Laws in Dundee, Scotland. Fox McLeod is watching us from the Nebraska State Fair.
Ah, very good.
Eat a corn dog for me there, Fox McLeod, with mustard, please. Gary Gerald just got off his tractor up there in Collins, Georgia.
Yeah, very good.
He's our Vidalia onion and peanut farmer up there. He was on the show here, and we had a great talk about farming in
Excellent.
the GPS. Tommy Usiak, glad that you're watching us. Carlton Bailey, CB's finally caught up on his sleep from all these middle-of-the-night rocket launches. Amy Collins, thank you for shouting out to us there. Tom Celentano supports our museum. I think Tom, he's in Hartford, Connecticut, I think Tom Celentano is. Cliff Watson is enjoying brekkie in Pomona, Australia, as he's waking up there. Marina R. is in Ukraine, Dnipro, Ukraine. And I know earlier Joel Jacobs was going to watch in Columbus, Georgia. Beverly Rother, good to see your name pop up. Beverly was a frequent visitor to Space Center and moved a little bit south. Carol Kavanaugh, she worked for
Hello, Carol. We go back a lot of years.
Do you know? Yeah.
Grand lady.
She saw your, was talking there, and she said she'd be watching. And Amanda Leonard and Marisa Kozłowski's watching in Poland there. So a lot of international people enjoying this program with Nick Thomas. Again, thank you, Nick, for supporting our museum this way. We look forward to seeing you with what you've got to share with us of the space flights in the month of September.
Very good.
So
look forward to it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Marty, thank you for a great program as usual. And tomorrow we've got the one and only Mr. Handlebar Mustache, Terry White, is going to talk about a couple of these shuttles that we talked about. I'm going to get him to talk a little bit about some of these exhausting fumes when the shuttle lands in, and how dangerous that is to even approach it at the time. And I'm sure Terry will have some other things to talk about. And then Wednesday, we have got a special program with Apollo legend John Tribe. John Tribe is a real national treasure in our minds, a hypergolics expert on those dangerous fuels on the Apollo command module that Rockwell built. So you're not going to miss John Tribe on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And he's a good one, isn't he?
Yeah, I haven't seen John in several years, but a remarkable, remarkable man. And as you say, such a touchstone for the history in the Apollo program. And again, great service to our country.
That's a good word, touchstone. One of the British engineers that came in the wave to answer NASA's call to go to the moon. John Tribe on Wednesday, Terry White tomorrow. I'm Mark Marquette saying we can't wait to see you on Stay Curious to bridge the space between us. Thank you, everybody.